G'day and welcome to the third public test of the survival update. Today I wanted to take a closer look at each of the start situations that you have in the solar system scenario. And the reason I wanted to take a look at each of these was that they've all got... Oh, I think I lost a landing gear in the process of landing. Oh, maybe not. They've each got their own unique problems and their own unique challenges. The Earth start does have that nice little easy bit of I can open my helmet and breathe and I don't have to worry about that anymore. The only thing I need to worry about is getting energy, which is easy because I can stick wind turbines up and that won't take me long, or I can go with solar panels and that won't take long either. I've also got easy access to resources, except for ice. If, like has happened to me here, you've started in the savannah, you might not be able to find any nearby. And if that's the case, you probably do want to head somewhere where you can get some relatively early. Otherwise, your jetpack is going to be off for most of the early play. You might be wondering why I've dug such a deep hole, and it seems to me, and I might be wrong here, but when you're drilling actual rock, you get more rock. You can collect your rock much more quickly than if you were trying to collect the same rock from the dirt up here. So it can save you a bit of time. Now, in order to get this thing flying, there are a couple of things you can do that will make that happen very quickly. Main thing we need are a few computers and some interior plates. If we can get enough for a few of those, then we can turn this thing into a flying machine that is a bit unwieldy, but does work. Usual trick of grinding down and rebuilding the landing gear. Then, simply a matter of grabbing a remote control, grabbing one of those interior plates that we just made, and starting to whack it on the front. And then with the remote control built, all we need to do is get a gyroscope and this thing will be flying. The gyroscope does have a little bit of a challenge. It needs a large steel tube, and the easiest place to get one of those from is going to be from the atmospheric thrusters, as I don't believe there's anything else we want to grind down that contains them. We don't want to grind down the O2H2 generator, that would be a bad idea. And I don't see anything else in here that has large steel tubes. So we'll take off one of these motors, and then grind off a few steel plate, and we'll be good to go. There we have it. We're ready to go. The other reason I thought it'd be useful to mention this particular tactic is that with the spawning system as it now is, you will actually spawn near other players. So if you're on a server, you'll actually end up near those other players when you start, which may or may not be a good thing. If they're friendly, it'll be a great thing because it'll be fun. If they're not friendly, however, probably don't want to be so close. So this can be a quick way of getting away from everybody. Now, I've just made a group of my landing gear, and now I will turn on my atmospheric thrusters that remain. Turn those on. Grab control of the remote control, which I've already done, which I forgot that I'd already done. And now we can... I'll just turn off auto lock so I don't accidentally relock, which can happen. Then we unlock, and even with just the 3 thrusters, we can take off. My preferred way to try and find ice, mainly because it's the easiest, is to get as much altitude as possible. And if you're lucky, you'll spot a lake, but otherwise you might spot something like that behind us, which is a snow-capped mountain, and that will work just as well. So let's head over there and get ourselves some ice. This thing is a bit unwieldy to fly, as it only has thrust in a single direction, but with a bit of care you can get some pretty decent mobility out of it. Now that we've got even more altitude, it looks like there's something suspiciously lake-like over here. So I think maybe that would be the easier place to head toward. It's a lot closer than those mountains off to our left, so I think I will just head straight there. That way we'll have access to ice, we'll have access to stone, we'll have access to all of the resources we need, and we can get going. And if there were hostiles in the area, you could just keep flying for quite some time. As you can see, even when I'm full thrusting, I've got almost an hour of power with these thrusters on, so you can make some pretty good distance out of that, if you've got the patience to keep flying this way. Also, probably if it's daylight. If you land on the night side, it might be a little more difficult. Or you'll just have to fly a bit more carefully. And a nice gentle landing on the sand. There we have it. Safely in a place where we can get access to literally everything we need to get our base underway. Dropping in on Mars has a lot of the same sorts of problems as the Earth-like planet. Except, we've got one additional issue, which is that we will run out of oxygen. And that makes our drive to get ice even greater. Now, you could be lucky like I've been and end up near one of the poles where the ice is, but if you didn't, you're going to need to hunt it down. And you're going to need to hunt it down in the same way as we just did on the Earth-like planet. You'll need to fit this thing out with a remote control and a gyroscope and fly your way there. So like before, we've built our remote control block on the front, and we could think that, oh, Mars is quite smooth, it's quite easy to drive on, why don't we go for wheels? Well, we could probably do that, and if we take our oxygen bottle from the truck, or from the drop pod I should say, you will likely have enough oxygen to survive on until you can build up a small base, build a basic assembler, because you need a couple of small steel tubes for each wheel. And there's not much on here that has small steel tubes. There are a couple of things up this way. If we have a look, our parachute hatch has 1. Our antenna has 1. So that's 1 wheel. What else even has any small steel tubes? Let's grab our rifle and things out of the seat, and then grind it away and have a look at what else is in here that might have one. Because we should ideally find 8. Though we could probably get away with 6 and make a little Reliant Robin style thing with as a 3-wheeler. I have successfully built a single-wheeled vehicle before, but it was not as heavy as this, and I'm not confident in driving it long distances. But it certainly would be an option available to you if you want to try. You could go the unicycle approach and just see how far you can get. So our small conveyor tubes don't have them. Our small cargo container doesn't have them. Our beacon has 1. And that's kind of it. There's only really enough small steel tubes for 1, maybe 2 wheels. Unfortunately, that means that we really can't go the wheel approach. At least until we build up a miniature base, and if we're going to do that, we may as well move over to the ice first and do it there. Which is a bit sad, but that's just the reality of it. Either way, Mars is a relatively easy place to start, as long as you can get towards some ice fairly quickly. As a start, Titan is almost identical to Mars. Ironically, it's also orange, so that makes it even closer to Mars. But there's ice everywhere. You don't have to go to the poles, and if you don't find ice terribly nearby, moving around is even easier because the low gravity means that you can move much further with much less power. And just like Mars, the atmospheric thrusters work. Unlike Mars though, you could actually get yourself to space with the atmospheric thrusters alone. There's enough speed that you can achieve in the atmosphere, and the gravity is low enough that you can actually push yourself all the way to space without using any hydrogen at all. Which is kind of cool. Kind of weird, but kind of cool. Not that you necessarily want to go to space right at the start, as that's going to make your life harder, since you won't have easy access to ice and everything else that you need within a short distance. Now, as a contrast to this, let's have a look at the alien planet and see how it goes in terms of us moving around using this same technique, and whether it's going to be a safe place to fly using just the atmospherics. Now, I've done this with default settings, so that means there are no spiders currently on here. Given that we're here to test whether all 4 thrusters are required to lift this drop pod off the ground, some of you might be wondering why I'm not using the landing gear to get our large steel tube. And that's because they've changed. They no longer require large steel tubes. I suspect that's to make them compliant with what can be made from the Survival Constructor, but what that means is the only large steel tubes we've got on board here are in these atmospherics and in the sneaky little hydrogen thruster underneath. One of the other things to note is that these atmospheric thrusters and the hydrogen thruster underneath are the only place on this thing you can source metal grids. And those are important because you need them for large grid small cargo containers, or cargo containers of any size on large grid. If you're wanting one of these on your base, you will need to scrap those metal grids or collect those metal grids from your atmospheric thrusters or from your atmospheric thrusters and the hydrogen thruster in order to build it. The only alternative to that is to get your assembler up properly first with a refinery and find some cobalt so that you can actually build the grids. Which is not often the thing that I end up doing. I often end up grinding off my thrusters and turning them into a small cargo container so that I've got a bit of storage space for all the stone I've been collecting. So with that out of the way, we can now build this gyroscope and test this lander. So let's unlock and let's go, and easily. No question this can do the lift whatsoever. So we really don't have to worry too much. We could probably even get rid of one more thruster and we'd still be fine. In fact, let's grab one of our atmospheric thrusters and turn it off. Let's turn off 3 of them. Okay, with 3 of them off, I do not have enough lift. But with just 2, you can fly this thing. So you'd be able to make this a flyable cargo rig if you had, even if you'd used the remaining thrusters to make a large cargo container on a base. Which is kind of handy. And then, like always, we head our way off to find some ice. The moon pod starts off a little bit differently because it has a few more challenges than the other starts we've looked at so far. Everything else has atmospheres so that we can use those atmospheric thrusters to get around. We also know that we've got the hydrogen thruster, so we can still move around, but just in case, they provided us wheels, so if you're willing to and you've got the patience, you can simply drive across the terrain until you get to one of the poles and you can get yourself some ice. And like everywhere except for Earth, you will need to find the ice relatively quickly so you don't suffocate. And just in case you aren't patient enough to use your wheels, you can use your hydrogen thruster, which is on your hotbar. Now, this is set to an override with your toggle on off. So it's actually pushing, how hard is it pushing hydrogen thruster? At 50 kilonewtons. So it's pushing reasonably hard, but not too hard. What I would actually do is turn it off for a second. Then hydrogen thruster, turn off its thrust override, turn it back on. We can now just control this a little more carefully with our space key instead of having to use a toggle on off to try and glide us down onto the ground. But this can be a very useful method to try and find out which way the poles actually are, because they can be very difficult to figure out from down at ground level. So I'll get myself some altitude. Still can't see anything on the horizon. Let's get a bit more. We'll probably end up in space. Oh, there's ice. There we go. And much like flying the other pods, you will have to do some strange maneuvers in order to get things going. Now, I did not add extra ice to this pod because I wanted to see just how far we could get on the ice that we start with. And you can get a fair distance. I want to stop going up though. Kind of want to just go forward towards that ice. Then we come in for a nice, gentle landing right near the ice patch. Perfect. Turn off our thruster and we are good to go. So that was actually pretty easy. And how much ice have we been left with? 141. So we made it here on the standard ice that we started with. We didn't actually have to get any more to get this far. If you were worried about how far you had to go, you could certainly try and get yourself out into space and then coast overhead, stop, and then drop down that way, and you might be able to save a bit of fuel. But even with relatively inefficient flying, as I was not taking any particular care to conserve fuel, this was relatively easy. And now we're in space. So in this start, just like in every other one, we really need to find ice soon. But we've got no predictable way of finding it. It could be in this asteroid right in front of us, or it could be in none of the ones we can see. So, in order to make it a lot easier for us to find it, we really want to get a detector. To get a detector, we need to get a basic refinery, but to get the detector components, we're also going to need to build assemblers. So we're going to need to go to that rock in front of us, start mining some rocks so that we can collect some materials to be able to actually get this thing done. Let's have a look at what we need for our basic refinery and basic assembler. Basic refinery, we can pop on there. We'll probably want to pop it like that. And then we can pop a basic assembler on top of that. There's plenty of plate to be scavenged from this build. Just be mindful of not breaking the front off from the back half, because that could cause you some issues later. We can get some construction components from these cover walls. get some more construction components from that catwalk. We can even, from this battery, get quite a few steel plate without causing it any damage. Just be very careful not to grind it below that functional line. So if you do that, you'll have set yourself back a fair way. This is probably the easiest way to collect a good chunk of steel plate that you need for these, because we need 100 for that one and 60 for this one. So we've got all the steel plate we need now. Now we just need to get some motors, some computers and construction components and a few displays. That's actually not that hard to collect. Getting the components you need for the assembler and the refinery is only a small part of the battle. The stuff that I found took the longest was actually getting enough nickel in order to build the 20 detector components that you need for the large grid ore detector. And even once you've done all that, you may have the kind of luck that I did when I was doing this, which is that it took me, well, I didn't even find ice after I'd looked at 10 separate clusters of asteroids. So I thought, why don't we head to the moon and see if this thing can actually land there, since that's a place I know has ice, and it'd be nice to find out if this thing can fly about on the moon in its default setup, even with a couple of extra blocks added on. It's looking good. We're only 300 meters up. It's looking very good. This is even with the assembler and the refinery attached to this thing, so it's not even just in its default lighter state. I've actually added a bit of extra weight to this. This is a properly viable option for us to get some ice. We can either go here, well, really it's just here, because without a jump drive, you don't really want to be going to Titan or Europa to try and get your ice. They are a long, long way away. It's the random nature of the space start that can make it so difficult. Sometimes it can be one of the hardest starts possible, apart from spawning in space in your spacesuit. And other times you could get really lucky, and I've had both. While testing for this recording, I managed to find ice on my second and my fifth asteroids, but then this time as I'm recording, I still haven't found an asteroid with ice on it. And that's with a large grid detector going, so I shouldn't have missed anything. So boy, if you're doing a space start, you do need to get at least a little bit lucky, or head over to the moon and stock up on ice before you head back out to space. That is definitely a viable alternative. So we've seen the Earth-like, the moon, the alien, Titan, Mars, and the space pod. The spacesuit is just insanity. You would have to get incredibly lucky to find a derelict that you could actually find the useful parts that you needed in order to build a basic ship. Then you'd have to find some ice, and you'd have to do that all before you run out of power. Well, except for the ice bit. You didn't need that before you ran out of power. The chances of you successfully doing that are very, very low, and it obviously relies on luck. So that's hard in a special sort of way. The reason I left Europa to last is that it's actually what I would consider to be the hardest without relying on luck to make it hard. Let's look at why. So when we land on all of the other planets and all of the other starts, we've got plenty of rock around us. But all I see is ice. Ice, ice, and ice. There are some ores underground, but we can't refine them without a basic refinery. So that's not really much use to us. So we wouldn't be able to build any basic blocks, which is a problem. We can't build any basic blocks, so how are we going to do anything? We can't just shove stuff in the survival kit. We're stuck. Let's have a look from higher up and see if there are any spots that look like they could be rock. It's not looking great. Not looking great at all. This is all very much ice. And the ice goes the entire way through Europa. It is not just on the surface, it is right the way through to the other side. And I tested that in a previous save. I went through with voxel hands and I drilled the entire way through it. Found the center and I was still surrounded by ice. In fact, on that one, I even had some little red spots of ice that I hoped would be something like the Martian soil, but they weren't, they were just red ice. So I still had nothing but ice. So your only option, if you spawn on Europa is to leave Europa. Which is a bit sad. I kind of hoped I'd be able to stay here. But I don't believe there is enough on board this rover, this drop pod I should say, to put together 100 steel plate without breaking things irreparably. There are only 3 steel plates in each of these atmospheric thrusters. And we might just be able to scrape together 100 from everything, but I just don't believe that would be possible. And even after you've done that, you still need to be able to build a rotor so that you can actually attach it to a power source. The reason I say a rotor would be the way to go is because we won't have any of the components to build something like a solar array or a wind turbine, because we don't have the parts for those either, and we would need to manufacture them. But to manufacture them, we need to refine stuff, and the only way we can refine stuff is to build the refinery, which we need the power for, so you can see where this is going. We're stuck. The only option is to leave. I feel like there might be just a small chance that you can do it another way, but that it would be incredibly time consuming and involve shuffling parts into and out of other things in order to get it working. Now, remote control and gyroscope, they're going to be the 2 things we need. The remote control needs an interior plate. What have we got that's got interior plate? We've got our passenger seat. We can grind 10 of the interior plates out of that. We can grind some of the construction components out of it, and it will still remain functional. So let's pop this down, see what else we need to fill it. We need to get a motor and we need to get a computer. So we can get a motor from the atmospheric thrusters, and we can get a computer from the parachute. In fact, we can get the motor from that too. That'll work. There we go. We have our remote control. That was easy. The next bit, not so much. Gyroscope. We need a large steel tube, and we need a few more steel plate and a couple of motors. So we'll go with grinding this off to get most of those. In fact, we need to grind down until we get that large steel tube. Yep, there we go. Pop the parts back in because I don't need to hold them. We need 3 more steel plate. And now, for the fun part. We need to find 3 computers that we can sacrifice. I spy with my little eye a timer block in there. I reckon that is a good option. I think they have computers in them. Let's grab our rifle and our ammo out of there so that I can grind away this seat. As I was intending to grind away that seat anyway. So the timer block has 1 computer in it, so let's take that. The beacon also does, as does the antenna and the ore detector. So those are our options for blocks we can grind down. I don't think we really want to take it out of the small cargo container. Although it is tempting. I did this a slightly different way before, but this is, whoops, I think a better option. So we can go with our straight pipe there, pop our curve in there. We should have enough parts for both of those. There we go. Now, got 2 of our 3 computers, and let's take out our beacon. We have a gyro. So we've got the necessary parts, and I've put this around the wrong way. We only have 1 hydrogen thruster, and I'm not going to be able to build more of them. The reason I'm not going to be able to build more of them is what I would need to use to unlock them. So if we go to hydrogen thrusters, I would need to build an O2H2 gen and a hydrogen tank. I can do the O2H2 gen because I can just grind the one we've got and rebuild it and unlock the tank. But there is no way I'm going to be able to build a hydrogen tank. It just takes too many parts. Even the small grid one, I'm going to need to find 60 small steel tubes, and there are not 60 small steel tubes on board this thing. If you didn't want to go through what I just did to get the computers and you have unknown signals available to you in the world, you could wait for one of them, as they carry at least a couple of computers, and that would probably get you by what you need. I wanted to do this in a way that was going to work regardless of your settings. So, let's pop our chair in this way. And the reason I like it this way is that it allows us to orient the camera in a more useful direction once we get up into space. Now that I'm in control of the remote control block, you can see why I want to have it in the orientation it's in. Because once I go into third person, if I have the thruster directly beneath me or directly above me, I can't actually rotate the camera far enough to get a direct line of sight on where that's heading me. So I want it like this so that I can get directly behind the thruster and know exactly where I'm going. And that's also why I've added a landing gear to the front or to the top. That'll allow me to glide down towards the surface of an asteroid without having to do a flip around just to get the landing gear to lock. It means I can do it either way and just gives me that flexibility that I might want. Now, being on Europa, we do have an atmosphere, so we can turn these on, and just like Titan, all we need to do is use our atmospheric thrusters and we can make it to space quite happily. There we go, 0. I'm a bit hopeless at detecting which way I'm actually headed, so I tend to just spin myself around in crazy directions until it all just works. Now, all I need to do is speed up to something gentle. Oops. Not so gentle, but we should lock in just a second. There we go. Lock to the asteroid. We can mine our rock. And we've got our Martian sunrise in the distance. And where is Europa? Where did I leave it? Oh, there it is. This would be quite a spectacular spot to set up a base in sight of all of them. You can see the alien planet. You can probably see Earth if I pay more attention to where it is. So those are a few of my tips and tricks of how I would go about starting in each of the different locations you can start within the solar system scenario. If you've got any of your own ideas, I would love for you to share them on how you start. If you do things differently and you think it might work better, I'd love to hear about it. This is all quite new, so I am still very much learning the best ways to do these things. As I intend to restart doing tutorials and testing as soon as the update goes live, I would love to know all of your... I'd love to steal all of your ideas so that I can make sure those tutorials are as good as they possibly can be. So there's all that and plenty more survival to come, and I will see you then.